Hello and welcome to the Whoever Podcast, a Christian podcast for non-Christians. My name is Brian.
I'm Andrew, and today our text is Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 45. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake. He was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost, and they cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran throughout that whole region, carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, or the countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed.
So that's our text. A little bit of context. Jesus is preaching, healing, casting out demons, doing amazing miracles. He sent his disciples out on a mission. They went out and they preached the gospel. They did some miracles, and they came back. And then we just saw Jesus fed the 5,000 people. Miraculously took 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and fed, it was actually closer to 10 or 15,000, and fed all these people. And then now we get to verse 45, our text today, and it says that immediately they got into he made the disciples get in a boat and go on ahead of him. And so now they're leaving that, and that's where we get our text here.
Yeah, so Jesus, he's just finished. He's still got a large crowd. He fed them, but now he is going to dismiss them, and he's going to sort of disperse them. And he tells the disciples, you guys get in the boat and go across, and then Jesus is going to do this. So the disciples get in the boat, and they start rowing across, but wind and storms are common on the Sea of Galilee, and so they get into trouble. And Jesus, standing on the shore looking out, can see them straining against the oars and working hard to get the boat to go where they want it to go.
Yeah, and so, again, we see that Jesus has compassion. He goes to people in need. He sees that they're straining and working hard, and so he goes out there, and Jesus doesn't have a boat, so he walks on water, as one does, I guess, if you're the Son of God. I mean, this is pretty crazy that he walks on water, and obviously the disciples are surprised because they see him and they think that he's a ghost. And it says they cried out. Like, I'm curious what they cried out. Was it just like a, ah, or like, it's a ghost? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
But so Jesus walks out to them, and they're scared, they're terrified. And so Jesus encourages them. He says, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." And he gets into the boat with them. And I'm just kind of thinking that this is a little bit of an encouragement for us, that when we're straining, when we are in tight spots or we're really struggling, like, Jesus comes to us. And not only does he come to us, but he got in the boat. Like, he didn't just like stand on the water, because he could have done that, been like, maybe you should try rowing harder. Or, like, he didn't just like give them instruction from afar. He got into the boat with them. And I think that a lot of times in today's world, when we're struggling, sometimes Christians or the church will tell you, well, you just got to pray harder, or like, you just got to do harder. Well, like, maybe that's a solution, but I think what Jesus is showing us is that he gets into the mess with us. He's right there with us. And I think as Christians and as the church, we're called to do the same thing, where rather than just telling people what to do, we also got to be getting into the boat, metaphorically speaking, to help them.
Yeah, the church is definitely called. Jesus established the church before he goes back up to heaven, and he says that his body on earth is going to be the church. We're supposed to be doing what he was doing. And Brian's right. Here he walks to them, he encourages them, and then he gets into the boat with them. He spends time with them. He sort of is around. And as Christians, that's what we're called to do when we see people who are struggling or things that are difficult around us, is we climb into the boat. We climb into the situation, even if it's messy or difficult, right? If I can walk on the water, it's probably easier just to walk the rest of the way. Like, I don't really need to get into this, probably dirty boat with these people, and maybe they want me to row too, and I'm like, I could have just walked. But that's what we are called to do. We are called to entangle our own lives and make things more difficult for ourselves because the people around us need that.
Yeah, I kind of think of like when my kids were toddlers, when they're really little. I just put my hand down, but you probably can't actually see that. When they were short, and they want to hold your hand and walk somewhere, and they're just learning to walk, so they kind of walk a little bit slow. And walking with them then, it means that I'm stooping down a little bit to grab their hand, and it means that I'm also walking slow. And it would be easier for me to just walk upright normally and walk, whether we're going across the living room or going, across the yard or whatever. And I could just tell them from afar and say, okay, you got to just keep your balance, keep the speed up, whatever. But instead, I'm walking with them, and that's what God does with us. It's harder. I don't know if it's harder for God, but it's definitely less convenient for God to do that. But He does because He loves us, and that's what we're called to do as well. And we see then that Jesus' compassion continues when they get across the sea. And then it says that there's people ran throughout the whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever He was. And so people are bringing more sick people to Jesus. And Jesus is healing more people. And it says that all who touched even just the edge of His cloak was healed. And so we see in this section of Scripture, we see two cases of Jesus' power. We see that He's powerful enough to walk across water, because that's a pretty big deal. And he calms the storm. So I guess there's three things. Because it says here that once He got in, that the waves died down, or the wind and the waves died down. So that's three things. So He walks across the water, He calms the storm, and then He heals all these people. And He's so powerful that even just touching His cloak is healing him, or is healing people. Yeah,
and interestingly, it says that the disciples still don't fully understand. They're getting there. They've spent all this time with Jesus, but they're amazed at the things He can do. They still don't really get what's going on. They just know we're following this guy, and he's from God. We've got that part down, but they're not caught up to Jesus is the Messiah and what He is there to do yet.
Yeah, and that's coming soon. Another couple of episodes, and we're going to get to them confessing that Jesus is the Messiah. Yeah. But for right now, they're just continually amazed by all of the crazy stuff that Jesus is doing and how He's showing this amazing grace and compassion. I think as we wrap up here this episode, I want to just encourage you that God is willing to get into your mess. If you're in a metaphorical boat, you're in some sort of mess right now, and you're straining against the oars, you're just trying to keep your head above water. He loves you enough to come out to you and to get into that mess with you. He's not a God who just watches from afar or tosses a life preserver at you. He's willing to get into the water with you, get into the mess, to help you out and to walk alongside you in that. But I think that's about it for today, unless you got anything else. Until next time, if you got any questions, you can feel free to comment below or reach out to one of us. Bye.